Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Q&A series with Qweerty Gamers. My name is Chandler Poling, and I'm really happy to have another interview with an amazing person in the video game industry named Ilan Eshkeri. Ilan is an award-winning composer, artist, and songwriter. He has had his work performed in concert halls, theaters, galleries, film, television, and video games. Some of his recent video game releases include the incredible Ghost of Tsushima and The Sims, which we all love and enjoy. So welcome to Qweerty Gamers Q&A. Ilan Eshkeri, thanks for joining me.
Hey Chandler, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big pleasure. Ilan and I have known each other for a long time, so this is going to be a pretty casual chat. But Ilan, I just want to first start out by having you kind of just tell the audience a little bit about what you do. What is your profession and how do you work in the gaming industry?
Well, I'm a composer, and which means that I make up tunes. For me, I've been, some people work in quite specific areas, but I've chosen and been lucky to work in very diverse areas. So I've done everything from writing pop songs to classical music for concert halls, ballets to films to video games. But really, what I spend my time doing is sitting in front of a piano keyboard trying to come up with melodies.
Yeah, that sounds like fun. What's some instruments that you really enjoy playing or that you enjoy writing for?
I love finding out about new stuff, but I don't know. There's so many different instruments to write for, and as I'm saying, I love finding out about new instruments, which I did a lot of on Ghost. There's also just the never-ending amount of combination of the instruments in an orchestra, or even the things that you could do with a three-piece rock and roll band. There's a lot of different variables, so it's great to just keep revisiting and reinventing.
Yeah, I noticed as composers love to experiment and create new sounds, but you mentioned ghosts. So tell us a little bit about some of the instruments that you were able to utilize in Ghost of Tsushima.
Well, there was a real desire when we were making Ghost for great authenticity to the period, and the game takes place in 13th century feudal Japan. So I started looking at what instruments were around at that time, and there was some of the more common ones that people will have seen, even if they don't know their names. The koto, which is an instrument you pluck, the shakuhachi, which is like a wind instrument, a bit like a flute, but during the process, I found an instrument called a biwa, which I was fascinated by. I mean, it was really appropriate for the game because it's the samurai game, and the biwa is the instrument that the samurai learnt to play, and they would have it was part of their training, and they would have sung the stories of their exploits on the biwa. And it's an unusual instrument nowadays because the tradition of it, along with the samurai tradition, as the samurai tradition lessened in Japan, the art of playing the instrument virtually disappeared until there was only one great master of it left. And I mean, this is such a romantic story. It sounds like I'm making it up, but it's completely true. And there was this one great master left, and that person taught a handful of people who are still around today. And one of those people is an artist called Junko Ueda, who's a very spiritual and powerful performer. And she sang on Ghost for me, but she also played the biwa.
Incredible. How would you describe what a biwa is? I don't even know what it looks like.
It's like a guitar that you play upright like this,
Uh-huh.
with less strings and giant frets, and it comes with like this giant plectrum that is like the size of, it looks more like a paper fan that you
Hmm.
use, and you whack the instrument with this giant plectrum really hard. It's way more aggressive and rock and roll than a little tiny triangular guitar plectrum.
That's amazing. Yeah, I've been playing Ghost of Tsushima. I think it's an incredibly gorgeous game, and your music is fantastic in it. Can you just talk a little bit about the process of adding music to video games? Because there might be some gamers out there that don't quite understand the complexity that goes into writing music and the different things, whether you're scoring a cinematic versus a fight or whatnot. Like, could you just go through a little bit about that?
Totally. I mean, the cinematics are a lot like scoring film and television, and they're very linear. They start in one place, they finish in another place, and the music and the picture are connected in a static way. They move at the same time. That can never change. But when you're writing for open world fights, well, in that circumstance, you need to write music that isn't static, that can evolve and that can change. And that is achieved by different sections of the fight being accompanied by different music. But then there's also, I suppose, like a third dimension where you write layers of the music, and the different layers can be used individually or all together or just some of them, and that is triggered by the music engine in the game. I like to describe it, it's a bit like a Big Mac, right? Where you have all these different layers, because what the artistic challenge of it is that you've got to really focus on the different layers, because yeah, there's layers in all kinds of music, but often you can't hear what that bit in the middle is doing. And it's a bit like that, in a Big Mac there's lots of different interesting layers that might be quite tasty on their own, right? But that middle bit, that little bit of brioche bread in the middle, that's not going to be very good on its own, right? That's going to be pretty boring. But when you're writing in a dynamic video game way, that bit's got to be interesting too. So you've got to really write with a lot of care and attention every single part. So that bit is both technically challenging and artistically challenging.
That's pretty fascinating. It's almost like a painting, and you have to have different colors, but when they're all together, they have to look good. So you have to know like what's going to sound good on top of each other or pulled apart. Like it's, I think the game engine and how that works in development is so fascinating because it's all based on the player's experience and exactly what they're doing. And music is a pretty linear thing. So like how it somehow evolves into a gaming experience is so fascinating to me.
Yeah, and I think in Ghost they worked really hard on the music engine, so it reacts very intelligently to the choices that the player is making. But the flip side of all of this i- is that what I just described is completely unique to gaming, and but the other side of it is, of course, that a video game is just the latest iteration of the oldest art form that has existed in the history of humanity, right? It's just a new way of telling a story. And if you go back in time, before that there was film, before that there was opera and dance, and then there was theater, and then there was big songs, and then poems that people sang, and if you go back to the earliest iteration, it's a cave painting, right? That's just human beings telling a story by drawing something on a wall. But all of these things are just storytelling, and my job is to tell a story through the medium of music. And whether I'm doing that for a video game or a ballet, or even if somebody asked me to write music for a cave painting, it would be the same process.
That's incredible. Yeah, because you're essentially a storyteller in your own way of adding music to these stories. There's a lot of music in the game that there's people playing music, in the game, like whatever, songsters, or I can't even think of the right word, storytellers, musicians. Did you also work on that as well? Did you work with musicians?
Yeah, well, that was really mostly the in-house Sony team. We spoke
Hmm.
about it, and I sent them a lot of material because I had done a ton of research, and I sat with music groups who are still making this kind of music. So I hope that that was useful, but but I was so busy crafting what I had to do. It was an enormous task. They were yeah, the Sony PlayStation music team are an incredible bunch of people, and they looked after most of that.
Do you know off the top of your head how many minutes of music you had to write of score on the game?
Well, I think I wrote 100 plus, maybe 100 and something minutes of music, um,
Wow.
but that is in the game. But actually, I probably wrote double that because when I write, I. There are many themes that I wrote for Ghost of Tsushima that we didn't use because it was part of the journey of discovery of working out things, and that's always my process. You write lots and lots of things, and then some of them stick, some of them don't. You keep the best ones. It's like a rock and roll band, right? Who put out an album and there's 12 songs in the album. They didn't just write those 12 songs. They wrote tons of songs and they worked out which the best ones were. So that's part of my process.
Yeah. Do you ever think that you would put a concert together of Tsushima?
Oh, I'd love that. We'd have to wait for the pandemic to
Yeah, of
pass.
course.
But yeah, I mean, you know very well. You've been to my show, so you know how much I love getting up and doing a show and making a spectacle. Um, so yeah, I would. If anyone wants to put on a show of Ghost of Tsushima, I'm 100% up for it.
Cool. Well, after the pandemic, we'll have to explore that option. Now,
Especially,
I'm,
I would borrow
yeah.
B1 and get that giant plectrum.
Well, you have to train on that, don't you?
Yeah,
You have to get a
it's
samurai
very
master to
dangerous.
teach you.
I better not do that. I wouldn't want to insult the great B1 players of the world.
Um, so let's just go back to your beginnings. What was one of the first video games you remember playing?
Um, well, I can remember my father coming home with a VIC-20, which was one of the very early home computers, and you had to load games in it from a tape cassette, and uh, and there were some very rudimentary games, a sort of Space Invaders game. There was a game I remember called Blitz, where there was a plane that went across the screen, and you dropped bombs, and you could destroy these buildings. Those are my very earliest memories. But then also going to the arcades and playing Pac-Man, and then I got a Commodore 64, and there were better games on that. But Outrun really, that Ferrari Testarossa driving down the road, that was a very felt very three-dimensional at the time, and it was a very exciting game to play. And I can remember being on holiday by the beach, and me and my brother were just in the arcade playing Outrun, and my mom would be like, "Get on the beach," and we just. And then eventually, it came out on the Commodore 64. They couldn't put it on it because it needed too much data. But the way they solved the problem is they made the game without any music, and then they sent you a tape cassette of the music separately that you could put on in the background, which was brilliant because then you could listen to the music whenever you wanted.
That's awesome. I would, and they, I feel like they should do that more often, send you complimentary materials with your game purchases. That's fun. I think everybody who is watching probably has that experience of being somewhere like a beach or whatever, and you're inside playing video games. Yeah, I definitely have been on vacations with my family. I can remember distinctly playing arcade machines when we should be outside, being kids. But when we chatted earlier, you mentioned that you were a big Sonic the Hedgehog fan.
Oh man, I love Sonic the Hedgehog. I still love it. Although
Yeah.
the movie looks like it's going to be a bit disappointing.
No, it's good. I saw it. It's
Is
way
it?
better than you
Is
would
it?
ever imagine.
Oh, no way. All right. You've convinced me. I'm going to
I
watch
found it hilarious. Like, I really was unsuspectingly hilarious to me.
it. Oh, good.
But
All right. That's it.
yeah, the music in Sonic is really iconic, which
Oh,
rhymes.
fantastic.
And
And also,
yeah,
did you play it?
of course, yeah.
So you remember when you could go to like the bonus section and it was always really insanely sort of trippy and the
Hmm.
music, those bits was always amazing as well. I love that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, that was an incredible game, incredible music. And what that brings me to is I want to jump us over to The Sims, because The Sims is such a crazy platform for people. People love The Sims. They spend hours and hours and hours of their life in this with The Sims. And so can you just talk us through a little bit about your music in the game and what parts you did contribute to?
What I do for the game is I wrote for Sims 4. Just to be clear, I haven't done any others, but it's seven years I think now that I've been doing Sims. So it's a long time, and I wrote the theme music, and I keep rewriting the theme music in case you're noticing new versions. That's me desperately trying to reinvent myself over and over again. And then I write all the music that you get whilst you are creating your Sims character, or whilst you're building a home, or any of the other menus. And then I also write all the music that you get for your moods, or for your achievements, all the little stingy bits, or the longer bits when you die, or when or woohoo.
Yes, let's talk about woohoo music. As someone, I've only played The Sims very lightly a long time ago, so I know what a woohoo moment is. But like, is that a lot of music, or how do you approach scoring woohoos?
Wow, you have to draw from your own experience.
Yeah.
Um, the woohoo music's about is longer than most bits. It comes with a sort of bit of animation, um, but everything about The Sims is is for me the way I approach it is just it's got to be approached with a sense of humor. I love what Carl Stalling did with the animations. He's a real hero of mine, and he would just write little musical jokes in the middle of the cartoons he was scoring, and the musicians would all be giggling. They'd all get the jokes and what they meant on the screen. So Bugs Bunny would be dying, and he'd sort of do a version of the dying swan, Tchaikovsky's Dying Swan from Swan Lake, or whatever. He was always making these very amusing musical references. So I don't do that. Well, I sometimes do that in The Sims, but there isn't much opportunity for it. But what I do is I try to approach it with a lot of fun, with a lot of joy and a lot of fun, and with lightheartedness. And I try to mix up my collaborators. And so I often I work a lot with rock and roll bands and pop bands, and I always try to bring in artists that I'm working with, not really allowed to say who they are, but there's a lot of really quite famous artists who've played on the soundtrack of The Sims, and we do it as just like it's a fun day in the studio. It's like, hey, you're not busy, you're not on tour, you want to come to the studio and just have a laugh and make up some fun music, and also it's also, I always said early on in my career, I'd love to have the job of writing the music for Sesame Street, because it'd be really great. You'd get a call every week and say, listen, can you write some music about the letter A, the letter G, and the letter F, and write a song about a hole or whatever, right?
Right.
Something
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
abstract. And I always thought that would be really imaginative and fun, and that's exactly what The Sims is like. I just get a call from the person in charge of sound and music on The Sims, and he goes, "Hey, we're just gonna do something on uh, vampires. We're gonna do something on cats and dogs. We're gonna do something on just any old random thing that you can island life." And then you have to think of a way to do that whilst keeping the spirit of the style of music that I created initially, and that style was about mixing together lots of different styles.
How do you think music has evolved in video games from your early days to now? Like, how would you say it has changed?
Well, at the start of video games, it was a problem with space. There was just 8-bit synths that were built into the game. You couldn't do very much. Now, uh, now it's you could put as much music as you want in the game, and you could put full beautiful recordings in 5.1, but it's about designing an engine that makes the music evolve as the player makes not evolve but adapts. That makes the music needs to be adaptable as the gamer makes choices in the game, and the artistic challenge of that is to make it not boring and not repetitive, and um, and as I said before, it's both an artistic and a technical challenge, and when it works, I think it's incredibly powerful because the emotion is, as you make choices, the emotion is responding, and and the music is constantly evolving as you move about the world in your own unique way, and you reflect basically getting a unique soundtrack for your unique adventure, and I think that's incredible, and I think the systems surrounding that will develop, and I think the skill involved artistically and creatively, we will develop our skills to be able to make that more effective.
Absolutely. I do agree that the music in games now feels very cinematic and lifelike in a way. Like as you're playing, your emotional response to it is intense, like way more intense than watching a movie passively because you're really actively involved in what's happening in the game. But what I find is missing is that iconic 8-bit or 16-bit theme that you hear at the start of every level, like Sonic. It's just like you always hear that song no matter what because the level starts and that's how the music comes in. And that's one thing where I feel like it might be missing a little bit. I mean, there's indie games, of course, that do this. That's incredible. But I do feel we are losing our iconic uh, video game melodies that we had growing up. But then you
Maybe
wouldn't have that experience because you would take you out of it, of course.
I suppose um maybe there's too many. I mean, I'm just speaking off the top of my head. I don't play a huge amount of video games, but maybe there's too many. I wrote a lot of different themes for Ghost, more than I would have written if it was a movie. But also the amount of hours you're playing it is much longer. But maybe
Oh yeah.
maybe we need to repeat themes more readily in video games, because I don't know, you get Luke Skywalker's theme and Darth Vader's theme enough in one film of Star Wars, don't you?
That's true. Very true. Um, I'm going to move over to some of these Q&As or questions coming from the audience because I think there's some of them are very interesting.
Oh, great.
A question from Ratings. What's your favorite random fact about composing music for The Sims?
I already gave it away when I said there's lots of secret rock and roll musicians and pop musicians who've taken part who've contributed their performances to it. What's another secret fact? Another secret fact is that when I wrote the Sims theme song, I wrote it with words and it actually has lyrics, but nobody in the world knows what they are apart from me and the producer engineer who made it with me.
Wow, we need that released. We want the Sims song. The next question I have from Bobby Wolfenstein says, Ghost of Tsushima is such an impressive soundtrack, and the track The Way of the Ghost really goes under the skin. Can you talk a bit about the character of Jin and what fascinates you about him?
Well, thank you for that compliment. The reason I did the game was because of the character of Jin. I was very reticent because I didn't like the idea of doing a game with a lot of violence, slashing people up with a sword and blood. Not because I have a big moral point of view on it. I mean, God knows I spent most of my teenage life playing Mortal Kombat. But it's because I don't feel artistically, creatively, I'm not sure how I connect to that. And so I wasn't, I was reticent, but I went to meet with the guys at Sucker Punch and they walked me through the story. And I was so moved by Jin's story, and in particular by this idea that he's a character in emotional conflict because in order to, he's having to go against everything that he has been taught, the morality, the tradition of everything that he's been taught that is supposed to matter to him. He has to go against that in order to save his home and to save the people he loves. And so that conflict that emotional conflict is a very powerful and rich place from which to experience any emotion and from which to write music. And so that really drew me in. And Jin's theme is the sort of heroic side of his character. It's the way that the people of the island see him, and The Way of the Ghost is all about his inner turmoil.
I totally agree that that inner turmoil of Jin is really well done musically. I see a lot of compliments online about the music, so again, congrats. Our next question from Pale Tongue. What's it like to create music that players will be hearing a lot of and making sure it doesn't get too repetitive or annoying?
Well, making sure it doesn't get too repetitive or annoying is primarily, well, in the first part, it's down to me to write a tune that could stand being repeated and still be enjoyable. And then it's down to me writing the elements that make that up, because as we described before, music is deconstructed in video games. And so making sure that the elements that support that tune are also enjoyable. And I do that by trying to make sure that they are in themselves nice tunes or motifs that will bear being repeated. And then I've got to hand the baton over to the team at PlayStation, who are just incredible at creating this game engine that uses the music in a way that is repetitive, but not in a way that is boring or annoying, I hope. But they're very experienced at that and judging that. So it's a combination of all of those things. And to answer more widely your question about what is it like to write music that lots of people will be hearing, for me, I think that that's a great privilege. I just make stuff up in my head, and fortunately for me, on several occasions, the stuff that I've made up in my head is connected with a wide audience of people all over the world, and I find that very humbling. And in fact, one of the most humbling examples of that is that I wrote the music for a film called The Young Victoria, which is about the young love between Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. And I get ever since that film came out, and still today, I get emailed once a week by people who are getting married who want to have that music played by a string quartet, played on piano, played by something as they walk down the aisle. Um, and I am so humbled that I wrote something that people want to be part of this incredibly special moment in their lives. That blows my mind. So anyway, I'm very grateful.
This is beautiful. You said, like, what a privilege to be able to write music that people are putting in, a really important moment of their life. Next question, again from Bobby Wolfenstein. Have you ever thought of a remix dance event with your music, especially some of your game music?
Sure. Well, they remixed a bunch of the music from Ghost as sort of dance tracks that were released just before the game came out, and they are super cool. I wish they'd asked me to do one. I'm not very experienced in that well, but I did through my whole 20s was all about EDM, techno, and trance. Um, so I have a great love for that music. Um, uh, but um, but yeah, if somebody would give me the space to do that and a reason to do it, I'm sure I'd have a lot of fun. I don't know how good it would come out though.
Well, I can't wait for that moment. Last question from the audience. If anybody else has more questions, go ahead and throw it in the chat. But from, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, it looks like Valkyrie, Vickery. What advice do you have for those who are wanting to produce music for video games but maybe don't know where to start?
I think this is always a very difficult question to give helpful advice for. I think that if you're starting out, you have to try and do everything, especially in the current climate. If I was starting out now, I would do some of the things I did before, short films. People who make short films go on to make bigger films. But I would look for people who are starting out trying to make like a small app game. And just try to find anyone to collaborate with, no matter how small the project. And I would also, when I started out, the technology and the hardware was incredibly expensive. It was very difficult. But now, you get everything you need in a laptop. I would definitely make an album of my own work, put it out there. You never know who's going to hear it and say, "Wow, that's inspiring," and call you up, and and it just gives you practice at finding your voice. So so I would just look at every possible opportunity you had to create music for any kind of media, any kind of theater, any kind of dance, and just keep knocking on doors and just make your own music too.
Good advice. Another question came in. Can you talk a little bit about how you created your European Space Agency video event?
Oh, wow. Yes, I can. Thank you for asking. So for those who don't know, I've been working with the European Space Agency, which is the European version of NASA, um, and 6 astronauts who all trained together in the class of 2009. One of those astronauts, so the way I got involved was one of those astronauts is called Tim Peake. He's a British astronaut, and he got in touch with me because he was a fan of my music, and he asked me. He said, "Listen, I'm going up to the International Space Station, and we make these videos when we're up there, and the music is never very good, and I like your music. Would you make some music for me?" I said, "Yes, of course." He said, because who wouldn't say yes to an astronaut? And he said, "The problem is we don't have any money because we spend all our money on space." And I thought, okay, fair enough. Yeah, you should spend all your money on space. I said, "Well, that's fine. Just invite me to the rocket launch." He said, "We can't do that because at that time, Elon Musk's rocket wasn't ready, and the only way up to the space station was via the Russian Soyuz. He was like, it's on a in Russia, it's very hard to get to. You can't come to that. But I'm at NASA Johnson Space Center. Why don't you come visit me in Houston? And so I spent a couple of days getting the tour that money can't buy with an astronaut. And I was so inspired and so amazed. At the end of it, I said to Tim, why are we making a 5-minute film? Why don't we make a 90-minute film and we'll tour it all over the world? You could speak about being in space, and I'll make some awesome music, and we'll do images. And again, just to explain, when you say it's like this video project, it's actually 3 wide screens. That when we did it, when we did our first concert in Sweden, the screens were something like 30 something meters across, the 3 of them together. It was huge, and it was a really fantastic event. 10,000 people turned up, and they didn't leave, much to my relief. And we were, of course, meant to go on and be touring all this summer, but you know, like all other shows, because of the pandemic, we've been cancelled. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be back on the road next year. And please all come and see it.
Yeah, I can attest. It's an amazing show. All right, one last question that just popped in. What genre of video game would you like to make music for next?
Wow, I would like to do some kind of either some like a complete otherworldly fantasy game, or a science. I've always wanted to do science fiction. I'm a big science fiction fan.
Yeah.
And I've never gotten to do a science fiction movie, and even better than doing a science fiction movie would be doing a science fiction video game.
Great. Well, I hope that whoever is watching is like, I need Ilan Eshkeri to score my next science fiction video game.
Let's hope so.
Maybe you'll do a Mass Effect or something in the future. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me and all of us at Qweerty Gamers. Really appreciate it. Your work is incredible, and how exciting to be on one of the most popular games right now with Ghost of Tsushima. It's such an amazing project.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for having me on, and thanks for all the questions from the audience.
Yes, thanks everybody.